Elena had always believed that loyalty was the foundation of a good life. At 67, she wasn't rich, famous, or extraordinary in the eyes of the world, but she was proud of the life she had built. She had spent more than 4 decades married to Richard. Together, they had raised children, paid bills, survived difficult years, and celebrated happy ones. Like every long marriage, theirs had gone through ups and downs, but Elena never doubted that they would spend the rest of their lives together. That certainty disappeared on an ordinary afternoon. The day had started like any other. Elena watered the flowers in her garden, folded a basket of laundry, and planned dinner for the evening. Richard had been acting distant for several months, but she assumed it was part of getting older. Retirement had not been as exciting as either of them expected, and she thought he was simply adjusting. When he walked through the front door that afternoon, there was something unusual about his expression. He didn't greet her with his usual nod. He didn't ask what was for dinner. Instead, he stood silently in the living room. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words instantly made her uneasy. She sat down across from him, trying to ignore the growing knot in her stomach. "What is it?" she asked softly. Richard looked away before speaking. "I don't want to be married anymore." For a moment, Elena thought she had misheard him. The words didn't make sense. After 42 years together, people didn't simply wake up and decide to end a marriage. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I've been unhappy for a long time." The calmness in his voice hurt more than if he had shouted. There was no emotion, no hesitation, no sign that he understood the damage he was causing. Elena felt her hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think it would change anything." The answer felt like another knife to the heart. She stared at the man she had shared her life with, and suddenly felt as though she were looking at a stranger. Then came the question she dreaded most. "Is there someone else?" Richard was silent for a few seconds. That silence told her everything. "Who is she?" He finally met her eyes. "Diane." The room seemed to freeze. Elena couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Diane wasn't just a friend. She was her best friend. For nearly 30 years, Diane had been part of her life. They had celebrated birthdays together, taken vacations together, and supported each other through family problems and personal struggles. Diane had sat at Elena's kitchen table countless times. She had listened to Elena's fears and dreams. She had hugged her during difficult moments, and all this time she had been secretly involved with Richard. "No," Elena whispered. "It's true," Richard replied. The betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. The pain wasn't coming from one person, it was coming from 2 people she trusted more than anyone else. Over the following days, more details emerged. The relationship had not been a recent mistake or a brief affair. It had been going on for nearly 2 years. 2 years of lies, 2 years of secret meetings, hidden messages, and fake smiles. Elena found herself replaying countless memories. Every family gathering, every dinner party, every holiday celebration. She wondered how many times they had looked at each other while pretending everything was normal. The thought made her physically sick. A week later, Diane finally called. Elena almost didn't answer, but part of her wanted an explanation. Instead, she received excuses. Diane claimed that she had fallen in love. She insisted that nobody intended to hurt anyone. She talked about happiness and second chances. Elena listened quietly. Then she hung up. There was nothing left to say. The friendship was gone. The trust was gone. The woman she thought she knew no longer existed. As the weeks passed, Richard moved out of their home. Each box he carried away felt like another piece of their shared history disappearing forever. Friends began hearing rumors. Some expressed sympathy. Others avoided the situation completely. A few even acted as though Elena should accept everything and move on. But moving on wasn't simple. Every room in the house contained memories. Every photograph reminded her of what she had lost. At night, the silence felt overwhelming. Yet beneath the heartbreak, something unexpected slowly began to grow. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't acceptance, it was determination. Elena didn't know what her future looked like anymore. The life she had planned was gone. The people she trusted most had betrayed her. But despite the pain, she refused to let betrayal become the final chapter of her story. She had survived difficult times before, and somehow she would survive this too. The divorce was finalized faster than Elena expected. After more than 40 years of marriage, the legal process took only a few months to erase what had once seemed permanent. She signed the final papers with shaking hands, feeling as though an entire chapter of her life had been reduced to a stack of documents. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was watching Richard and Diane move forward as if nothing had happened. Only 6 months after the divorce, invitations began circulating among friends and family. Richard and Diane were getting married. When Elena first heard the news, she felt a wave of disbelief. 6 months. After 42 years of marriage, Richard had waited only 6 months before standing at another altar. The speed of it made everything even more painful. It was as if their marriage had meant nothing to him. The wedding became the talk of their social circle. Some people expressed shock, while others quietly accepted the situation. A few mutual friends even attended the ceremony. Elena didn't blame them. People often chose the easiest path, and confronting uncomfortable truths was rarely easy. Still, each person who celebrated Richard and Diane's relationship felt like another small loss. On the day of the wedding, Elena stayed home. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the living room window. The house felt larger than ever. For the first time in decades, she questioned what her future would look like. She was 67 years old. Most people her age were planning vacations with spouses, enjoying retirement, and spending time with grandchildren. Meanwhile, she was trying to figure out how to rebuild a life she never expected to lose. The loneliness was overwhelming. Days blended into weeks. She stopped attending social gatherings. She rarely answered phone calls. Even simple errands felt exhausting because she constantly worried about running into people who would ask questions she didn't want to answer. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, her phone rang. The name on the screen surprised her. Michael, Diane's ex-husband. Elena stared at the phone for several seconds. She hadn't spoken to him in years. After Diane divorced him, they had gradually lost contact. Unsure of what to expect, she answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Elena," Michael said gently. His voice sounded older than she remembered. "How are you holding up?" The simple question caught her off guard. Most people asked about the divorce out of curiosity. Michael sounded genuinely concerned. "I'm managing," she replied. There was a brief silence. Then he chuckled softly. That's usually what people say when they're not managing. For the first time in months, Elena smiled. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour. They talked about everything and nothing. They shared stories about adjusting to life after betrayal. Michael admitted that Diane's departure years earlier had devastated him. For a long time, he had blamed himself. He had wondered what he could have done differently. Eventually, he realized that some people's choices had nothing to do with those they hurt. That realization had helped him move forward. His words resonated deeply with Elena. For months, she had been asking herself endless questions. Was she not attractive enough? Had she failed as a wife? Could she have prevented Richard from leaving? Michael's perspective offered something she hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Over the next few weeks, their phone calls became more frequent. Sometimes they talked for 10 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. Neither of them judged the other. Neither tried to offer empty advice. They simply listened. One afternoon, Michael invited Elena to meet for coffee. She almost declined. The idea of socializing still felt uncomfortable. but something inside her pushed her to accept. When she arrived at the small cafe, Michael greeted her warmly. He looked different than she remembered. Older, certainly, but there was kindness in his eyes, the kind of kindness that comes from surviving pain without becoming bitter. Their conversation flowed naturally. They laughed about old memories. They shared stories about their children. For the first time in a very long time, Elena felt normal, not abandoned, not betrayed, just herself. After that meeting, a genuine friendship began to grow. Neither of them expected it. Neither of them was searching for romance. What they found was understanding. One day, while discussing hobbies and interests, Michael mentioned a small woodworking project he had been working on. He showed Elena photographs of handcrafted decorative pieces he created in his garage. She was impressed. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Elena had always enjoyed interior decorating and design. Soon they found themselves exchanging ideas. She suggested improvements. He experimented with new designs. What started as casual conversations slowly evolved into something more exciting. For the first time since Richard left, Elena felt energized. She woke up looking forward to their discussions. She began imagining possibilities instead of dwelling on regrets. Meanwhile, Richard and Diane continued showcasing their supposedly perfect life on social media. But unlike before, Elena no longer spent hours looking at their photographs. Something was changing inside her. The pain hadn't disappeared completely. The betrayal still hurt. But it no longer controlled every thought. A new chapter was quietly beginning. Neither Elena nor Michael realized it yet, but the friendship born from heartbreak was about to transform both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. And while Richard and Diane celebrated what they believed was their happy ending, Elena was slowly discovering that her own story was only getting started. By the time a year had passed since Richard left, Elena no longer spent her mornings thinking about betrayal. The pain was still there, hidden somewhere deep inside, but it no longer dominated her life. Instead, her days had begun to revolve around something unexpected: possibility. Her friendship with Michael had become one of the most important parts of her life. What started as occasional phone calls and coffee meetings had evolved into a genuine partnership built on trust, respect, and encouragement. One afternoon, Elena visited Michael's garage workshop to see some of his latest woodworking projects. As she stepped inside, she was amazed. Shelves were filled with beautifully crafted decorative items, handmade wooden trays, elegant wall art, and unique home accessories. Every piece reflected care and attention to detail. "These are incredible," Elena said, picking up a polished wooden centerpiece. Michael smiled modestly. "It's just a hobby." Elena shook her head. "No, it's much more than a hobby." The idea came to her almost instantly. People were constantly looking for unique home decor. Handmade products were becoming increasingly popular, and Michael's work was far better than many expensive items sold in stores. "What if we sold them?" she asked. Michael laughed. "Sold them? Who would buy them?" "A lot of people," Elena replied confidently. For the first time in years, she felt excited about something. Over the next few weeks, they began exploring the idea seriously. Elena used her design skills to help improve product presentations and packaging. Michael focused on creating new items and refining his craftsmanship. Together, they researched local markets, online sales platforms, and customer trends. Neither of them had experience running a business. Neither expected immediate success. They simply wanted to try. The first few months were challenging. They invested a small amount of their savings into materials, packaging, and a simple website. Sales were slow at first. Some weeks they sold only a handful of products. But instead of becoming discouraged, they kept improving. They listened to customer feedback. They experimented with new designs. They worked long hours, often spending evenings discussing ideas and planning future products. What made the partnership successful wasn't just their skills, it was their shared determination. Both had experienced devastating betrayal. Both knew what it felt like to lose something important. That experience gave them resilience. Every obstacle seemed manageable compared to what they had already survived. Gradually, things began to change. A local home decor influencer discovered their products and shared them online. Orders increased. Customers started recommending their business to friends and family. Soon, what had begun as a small operation in Michael's garage was generating more income than either of them had imagined. Elena felt alive again. For years, she had defined herself primarily as a wife and mother. Now, she was discovering new strengths. She enjoyed meeting customers, developing marketing ideas, and helping shape the company's future. Every success restored a little more of the confidence she had lost. Meanwhile, Michael flourished as well. His creativity expanded. His craftsmanship improved. Most importantly, he smiled more. The sadness that once lingered in his eyes gradually faded. Within 3 years, they moved the business into a dedicated workshop and showroom. They hired employees. They expanded their product line. Orders arrived from across the country. Revenue continued growing steadily. One evening, after reviewing their annual financial reports, Elena stared at the numbers in disbelief. The business had earned more money in a single year than she and Richard had ever imagined making during retirement. Michael looked equally stunned. "Can you believe this?" he asked. Elena laughed. Not even a little. For a moment, they simply sat there, enjoying the achievement. Neither mentioned Richard or Diane. They rarely did anymore. Those names no longer occupied a central place in their lives. Ironically, news about Richard and Diane occasionally reached them through mutual acquaintances. The glamorous relationship they had proudly displayed wasn't as perfect as it appeared. Financial problems had emerged. Arguments became frequent. Friends noticed growing tension between them. The excitement that once fueled their romance seemed to be fading. Elena felt no satisfaction from hearing about their struggles. If anything, she felt indifferent. The desire for revenge that once lingered in her heart had disappeared. Success had changed her perspective. She no longer wanted them to suffer. She simply wanted to continue building her own happiness. One afternoon, while attending a business conference, Elena found herself standing on a stage accepting an award for entrepreneurship. The audience applauded as she delivered a brief speech. As she looked across the room, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. A few years earlier, she had sat alone in her house, convinced that her best years were behind her. Now she was leading a thriving company, creating jobs, and inspiring others. The transformation felt almost unbelievable. When the event ended, Michael congratulated her. "You've come a long way," he said. Elena smiled. "We both have." And she meant it. Together, they had taken the pain of betrayal and turned it into something meaningful. What had once seemed like the end of their stories had actually been the beginning of an extraordinary new chapter. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, they looked forward to finding out. 5 years after the day Richard walked out of her life, Elena stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her company's headquarters and watched the morning sun illuminate the city skyline. Moments like this still felt surreal. There had been a time when she believed her life was over, a time when she sat alone in a silent house, wondering how she would survive the humiliation of being abandoned by her husband and betrayed by her closest friend. Back then, the future looked empty. Now it was full of possibilities. The business she and Michael had started from a small garage had become a nationally recognized brand. Their handmade home decor products were featured in magazines, sold in upscale stores, and shipped across the country. They had built something neither of them had imagined possible. Financially, they were secure beyond anything Elena had ever dreamed. The company was worth millions. Their team had grown to dozens of employees. Most importantly, the business had created a community of people who genuinely cared about one another. Elena often smiled when she thought about how differently life had turned out. The woman who once feared growing old alone was now surrounded by purpose, friendship, and respect. One afternoon, she attended a charity fundraiser sponsored by her company. As she greeted guests and spoke with local business leaders, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not because she was wealthy, not because she was successful, but because she was happy. True happiness had seemed impossible during those dark months after her divorce. Now it felt natural. As the evening progressed, a familiar voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. "Elena." She turned and froze. Standing a few feet away was Richard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years had changed him. His hair was thinner. His posture seemed heavier. The confidence he once carried so effortlessly had faded. Elena felt surprisingly calm. There was no rush of anger, no bitterness, no pain, just calm. "Hello, Richard," she said politely. He shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me." "I'm busy, but I can spare a few minutes." The conversation that followed felt strangely ordinary. Richard asked about the business. He congratulated her on her success. Then he hesitated. Finally, he spoke the words she never expected to hear. "I made a mistake." Elena remained silent. Richard looked down at the floor. "For years I've wanted to tell you that." The admission didn't bring satisfaction. It didn't feel like victory. Instead, it felt like the closing of a very old chapter. Richard explained that his marriage to Diane had not turned out the way either of them expected. The excitement that had once fueled their relationship eventually disappeared. Financial stress created tension. Arguments became frequent. Resentment replaced romance. A few years earlier, they had quietly divorced. Listening to him, Elena felt neither joy nor revenge. She simply listened. The details no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had moved on. When Richard finished speaking, he looked at her with visible regret. "You deserved better than what I did." For a moment, Elena remembered the devastated woman she had once been. The woman who cried herself to sleep. The woman who questioned her worth. The woman who believed her future had been stolen. Then she looked at the life she had built since then, and she realized something remarkable. Richard hadn't destroyed her future. He had accidentally opened the door to a better one. "Maybe," Elena said gently, "but everything worked out the way it was supposed to." Richard nodded slowly. There was sadness in his eyes, not because Elena had been cruel, but because he finally understood what he had lost. A few minutes later, they said goodbye. As he walked away, Elena felt no desire to look back. That chapter of her life was over. Later that evening, she found Michael speaking with several guests near the stage. When he saw her approaching, his face brightened with the same warmth that had become so familiar over the years. "Everything okay?" he asked. Elena smiled. "Everything is perfect." And for the first time, she truly meant it. The event concluded with a celebration of the company's latest achievements. Employees laughed together. Friends shared stories. The atmosphere was filled with genuine happiness. Looking around the room, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her there. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the uncertainty. At the time, each experience felt unbearable. Yet every painful step had eventually led her toward a life richer than anything she had imagined. She had learned that revenge didn't always involve confrontation. It didn't require anger, humiliation, or retaliation. Sometimes the sweetest revenge was rebuilding. Sometimes it was refusing to let betrayal define your future. Sometimes it was creating a life so fulfilling that the people who hurt you became little more than distant memories. As the evening came to an end, Elena stood beside Michael and watched their employees celebrate another successful year. The company was thriving, their lives were thriving, and the wounds of the past had long since healed. Years earlier, Richard and Diane believed they had won when they walked away together. What they never understood was that true victory isn't found in taking something from someone else. It's found in creating something meaningful for yourself. Elena had lost a husband and a best friend, but in the process, she discovered her own strength, built a remarkable future, and found a happiness that no one could ever take away. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.